Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Show. That I want to start with a question. Do you ever have difficulty saying no to your parents or drawing a boundary or setting a limit with your siblings or cousins, anyone in your family of origin or extended family? Do you ever struggle with sharing your preferences, your desires, your limits, or your deal breakers with those folks? Anybody? If the answer is yes, then today's episode is for you, my friend. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the different kinds of disordered boundaries that we can have with our family of origin and different ideas of things that you can do to get proactive and sort of release yourself from this frustrating situation. So before we get into it, if you happen to be new to my YouTube channel, hello and welcome. I'm really glad you're here. But before we get started, please make sure that you subscribe and that you hit that little bell icon so that you will get notified every time that I roll out something new, which is every Tuesday and every Thursday. Since you are the people that I'm rolling out all of this free content for, I want to make sure that you don't miss a thing. All right, do you want to move on into today's content? I think we should. Parents and boundaries. Let's talk about it. Well, when I say parents, you guys, a lot of times I'll say your parental impactors, I'll say your maternal or paternal impactors, because here's the thing, it does not have to be a biological parent. Let's just establish this up front. What we're really talking about today are the adults who raised you and how your boundaries are with them now. How is your communication with them now? Because part of the way we have to look at our parental impactors is that they have their own limitations, which we get. They have their own relationship to boundaries, right? They have their own disordered stuff, and they're humans just like we are. Now, if they're not respecting your boundaries, if that is part of the problem, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have bad intentions per se. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to let them just trample all over our boundaries, but it could be simply that they are oblivious, right? Or that they're so caught up in their role of parenting, because some parents never go on to the next phase, which I'm going to be talking about in today's episode, that they don't even see that what they're doing with you is inappropriate. Because the same way that I talk about us having our own boundary blueprint, your parents or impactors have theirs as well. So it's important to remember that, again, it's not a justification if someone's being abusive or if someone is trampling on your boundaries. It's just, we need to remember and really get that it's not like our job to teach our parents, right, how to navigate their own boundaries in the world. It is our responsibility to learn how to effectively communicate and assert our boundaries with everyone, including our family of origin and our parents. So it's very common. And actually what I find is this is probably one of the hardest ones. And it's something that I got asked about a lot, about boundaries in family, because there's such a massive cultural element that comes along with talking about boundaries. The culture, the country that you were raised in. And then you have the norms within your family system. We have societal norms, and then each family system is like its own little fiefdom, so to speak, where it's like how the family interacts with each other. What are the acceptable norms? Is it an open system, meaning other people from the outside could come and go? Is it a closed system where you didn't really have that? So think about it right now. Can you identify the home that you grew up in? Was it open or was it closed? My family system growing up was open. So there was lots of comings and goings, and my house was the house that we hung out at. My friends could always sleep over my house. My mother was very welcoming and generous, and I slept other places too, and I hung out at other places too, but it was an open system where my friends were not afraid when they were at my house. It was a safe place to be. My husband grew up in a more closed family system where you'd have extended family that could come over, but there wasn't a lot of in and out, and friends weren't really welcome and nobody was sleeping over. It wasn't like that. It was more of a closed system. And all of these things impact our boundaries. So in the guide that I'm going to give you along with this episode, go to terricole.com/guide. If you haven't already done your downloaded boundary blueprint, I'm going to give you some of the questions so that you can get an idea of your own, because you may not know, and this will be so much more impactful if you are clear about the family system that you grew up in and where your own beliefs and ideas and thoughts about boundaries came from. And when you answer these questions, you go, oh, right, it starts to make so much more sense. So, what are the ways that family systems can be disordered when it comes to boundaries? A lot of times you will have parents where their identity is so dependent on parenting that they literally don't know who they are. So they don't know how to not be a parent. And I'm not saying you can ever not be a parent once you're a parent, right, in the relationship, but you don't have to be actively parenting, because the next phase of development when it comes to having a relationship with adult children is we go from actively parenting, where hopefully we're teaching them, critical thinking skills and deductive reasoning, and, we're supporting them. And if they make mistakes, we teach them lessons, but we also don't humiliate them and whatever. Like, we're actively doing it. If they have a situation in their life, that situation is in our life too when our kids are minors, right? This is part of what active parenting is. When your kids get to the point where maybe they did secondary school, they're out of college, they live on their own, they live in another city, maybe they're dating, maybe they're engaged, maybe they're married. This is a whole different place where hopefully the skills and the tools that you gave them in childhood are serving them well in adulthood. And it's not that they can't talk to you about what's going on in their life, but hopefully they're managing what's going on in their life. This is what we want for them. We do not want adult kids to be dependent on us, right? It's just like that. There's a poem in the book, The Prophet, and it talks about parenting. It's so beautiful. And part of it is basically saying, we are the bows and our kids are the arrows. And what we want is to be strong and solid and give them the inspiration to go far in their lives, to pursue their dreams and their interests and their passions and whatever lights them up, hopefully. But it's not about us. It's about them. In a healthy family system, when we're raising kids, the family system is kid focused, right? It makes sense. The child's needs should be coming above everything else. This is what you agree to when you say you're going to have kids. I don't mean, kid obsessed. I'm just talking about kid focused. It makes sense. In disordered family systems, it's usually other focused, meaning there'll be a designated patient or someone who has an addictive issue or someone who's abusive. Then the whole system organizes around that person as opposed to organizing around children. This creates disordered boundaries in all the ways. In a healthy family dynamic, right, parents transition as their children grow, and now you relate to each other differently at every stage of development, which is true when you think about the early stages too. We relate differently to an infant than we do a toddler, a child themselves, to a teenager, and then into adulthood. The way that we treat them, the responsibilities that they have, our expectation of children changes as they grow and develop through these different phases of life. So we don't treat them the same because it wouldn't make sense to. So what are the ways that they're disordered? The perennial parent, right, of course, is the one that just can't stop, won't stop, treating you like you're 15 or like you're 10 when you're not. You can also have a situation where you're using money, and I've seen this a lot in my therapy practice, where families of means, people with wealth or generational wealth, there is a covert control being executed in the form of money. So it has to do with someone's inheritance. It has to do with, yes, grandpa will give you this or that, but it's not free. So there's a way for it to be healthy. I've also seen generational wealth where there's an expectation that the kids will work. They don't get access to their trust money until they're older. There's a way to do it so that you're not manipulating that person with the money or with the threat of withholding or taking the money away. But again, this is disordered parenting boundaries around money if this is happening for you. It's also disordered if the parent wants to be your best friend, because that puts a lot of stress on the adult child, I think. Because here's the thing, the mutuality inside an actual friendship isn't an appropriate dynamic for a parent-child, even if the child is an adult. I feel like you can have a very close relationship. I do with my own mother, but I wouldn't say that she was my bestie, because that would be not accurate. And it would also be weird to me. There has to be an expectation of, once your kids are grown, of respecting them, their sovereignty, their ability to make decisions, to do what they want to do. I mean, my mother still will give me her unasked for advice sometimes. I just don't take it. You know what I mean? Or I'll ask her to not give it to me. Sometimes I'll say, hey, I'm not actually looking for input. She knows, though. We've had this conversation many, many times over many, many years, where I just need you to hold space. If I'm upset about something, I don't need an answer, because trust me, Jan Nicole, I love you to death, and you don't have my answers. Only I have my answers, which I know. And so it's painful. And the reason why we don't want our parents treating us like children when we're grown adults is that inherent in that action is the parent basically saying, I know better than you do. I know you better than you do, and I know what you should do in your life better than you do. And you don't. And if that's where you're at, you have not succeeded at parenting, because parenting means you've given the kids the tools. You have faith that they're not fragile. You let the chips fall where they may when they're not your chips, although you're there for support. So I'm not saying we're just like, good luck. We're there, we're talking, we're listening, but we respect that adult children are adults. Another behavior that you may see with disordered parent and adult-child relationship is parents violating personal boundaries. Maybe living close, coming over without calling, having a key to your house and using it, not knocking. The unrealistic expectation that you should be available to them 24/7, whether it's on the phone, whether it's them just coming to your house. There is something so depersonalizing about it, and it can be really, really infuriating. I have a friend who lives right next door to her parents, and I cannot tell you how many times she's called me being like, you wouldn't believe it. I was getting out of the shower, and I go into the kitchen, and there's my father with the painter, and I'm literally in a towel. And he's like, oh, I was just showing Joe what, they think it's their house. And here's another thing. If you take money from people, if they are financially coercing you with cash, that is really difficult, because there's a silent and or spoken agreement about what it means if you are being financially supported and you're a grown adult. And there's no judgment on this. I'm just saying how it complicates boundaries. It complicates you asserting yourself. It complicates all of it, because it leaves you dependent on them. If there's family wealth to be shared, there's a way to do it where someone isn't doling it out to you, where someone isn't using it as a way to manipulate you. If somebody really wants to give you family wealth, lucky you, and that's fantastic. It should be in a trust. It should be done so that there's no interacting about it if it's not being used for coercive control. That's my 2 cents on that. But you also need to look at, are your parents interfering with your life, right? Your personal life? Are they getting involved with your friendships? Are they telling your partner something that you didn't want them to? Are they triangulating you with other siblings? These are all boundary issues. Are they not treating your kids the way you want them to? I had a client who was a vegetarian and her kids were vegetarians, and her mother-in-law would feed the kids hamburgers, even though she asked her not to. And it was like this power struggle between the carnivore and the vegetarian. And yet my client is the mother of these children. So sometimes you really have to go to extreme measures to a degree to actually assert your boundaries. But it's very important when it comes to your children, especially if it's things around health and wellness, or if you don't sort of force your kids to like hug and kiss other adults if they don't want to, but maybe your mother-in-law does. These are things that really have to be talked about because they actually impact kids. So for you guys, I would just wanted to bring this up and have you think about, where are you in your life with your family of origin? What other questions do you have about this? Because I know that there's also a lot that people are dealing with aging parents and dealing with siblings. And I feel like it's really important, and I'll put this in the guide, for you to have proactive conversations about what is happening as people age. What are your parents or your parental impactors wish? What is their financial situation? Like, this needs to happen long before you need it to happen. Don't just fall into the position of being a primary caregiver for your parents without having conversation with your siblings. I had someone who just wrote in and asked me a question and said that I do the primary caregiving for my aging mother because my siblings have kids, and they say to my face, "You don't have children, so you can be the primary caregiver," which is totally unfair. And whether this person has kids or not, that should not let the other siblings off the hook for the caregiving. But I find that a lot of times, if you are a natural caregiver, if you're a nurse, let's say, or if you're in the healing arts, or if you're an empath or a highly sensitive person, these things can tend to fall on you, and you can get into an established, disordered boundary situation where you're doing way more of the emotional labor and all the labor. And that really does not feel good, but it is avoidable. So I'll give you some ideas of how to be proactive when it comes to aging parents in the guide. And I want to hear what you guys have to say about this. Have you already thought about these things? Are you having these kinds of problems? You guys know where to find me. So I hope that this provoked some thought for you. And as always, take care of you. I want to say thank you for all your questions and your comments, because you know I read all of them and I love to highlight them. So this is from Jonah Zimmerman, and this is under the video, "Did You Parent Your Parents? Understanding and Healing Child Parentification." Finally ordered and I've almost finished your book, Boundary Boss. I've teared up so many times thanks to Terri's comforting language and finally reading her perfectly articulated scripts, helping me navigate the boundary dances we all experience in our family of origin. This topic, as well as many of her others, hit home for me. She comforts and speaks lovingly to our inner child and wounded selves. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Your words are truly magic. Well, Jonah, thank you so much. I'm a little verklempt. I'm a little choked up right now. I really appreciate you being here. I really appreciate you saying that about the book. It is so incredibly meaningful to me that the book has helped you and that it has soothed you, because literally that is exactly why I wrote it, was to elevate your ability to take care of yourself, protect yourself. So it makes me so happy to think that it's actually doing that.